reporter for the New York Times, Michael Schmidt, who's been all over this story from the beginning. Michael, good morning. So let's just remind our viewers, because so much has happened between then and now, about what these executive orders were, why they were in place, and the challenges that some, but not all of these firms made against them.
So basically, when Trump came out of the gate last year and started his retribution campaign, he started to use his powers in audacious ways. And one of them was against the law firms. He basically signed these orders that said they couldn't represent their clients, in front of the federal government effectively. And they barred them from going into buildings and such. And because of that, the firms were put into place. Do you fight or do you capitulate? And what happened is that Paul Weiss, a firm that had a long history of standing up to the government, a firm that had given more money to Democrats in 2024 than any other firm, decided to make a deal with Trump and decided to bend the knee. And in the wake of that, Trump seemed emboldened, and they went after more and more and more law firms. And by the end of it, they had 9 firms that had made deals, including the one that Neil Katyal works for. And there were 4 firms left who were willing to fight. And what was interesting about the 4 fighting firms is that they all went to court, and different district court judges all jumped in and basically stopped the executive orders. They said these were unconstitutional. And the legal questions on the executive orders, there wasn't really much debate. In this country, there's obviously on a lot of legal things, you could give a lot of different opinions of different people on different sides. There was no real legal defense of the executive orders, that there was a legal rationale for them. And yesterday, you had this administration, which has shown a willingness to go to the ends of the earth to defend pretty far out their legal positions, saying we're no longer going to try to defend this in court. We're essentially giving up. And that is a significant development in the larger arc of the law firm story, because it raises a question about the firms that made the deals. So they basically made deals around an executive order that the administration, not just judges, the administration won't defend the constitutionality of.
Yeah, and they knew about it. And Michael, you bring up a great point. That doesn't just apply to these law firms, but it applies to the administration's general strategy. We're going to put out an executive order. We know that courts, a lower court may rule against us, but then the Supreme Court, as they did throughout 2024 or 2025, will issue an emergency stay. And so months, maybe even a year will go by. The Supreme Court, dragging their feet all of last year, would never step in. So for the Trump administration, the logic is it's a de facto ruling for us. So these firms will have to bend the knee because the Supreme Court is allowing us to do this. They will not step in and do the right thing. They're letting the lower court rulings be stayed until we hear it maybe a year later. So it's basically a de facto affirming of what the Trump administration is doing with these executive orders. And that strategy has played out very well for the Justice Department because of the Supreme Court's refusal to step in and do the right thing. My opinion, not yours.
Well, look, the courts have shown that their speed, their or lack of it, makes it difficult for them to keep up with Trump. Trump can hit someone with an executive order. They have to go to court. They have to get a judge to jump in. They have to be, that order stopping that action by the Trump administration has to be able to still exist. The courts have to, not take that away. But what you see is that even where the Trump administration ultimately gets stopped, to your point, they still have success. So they still were able to indict James Comey and Letitia James. Ultimately, those indictments were thrown out, but they were able to create damage that the courts just are not fast enough and strong enough to move in and to get a hold of. And what you see to what you're saying is that they can take these positions like they did on these executive orders, and over many months or even, a year here, they can have a significant impact even if they end up losers. And by not being afraid of losing, they can have a massive effect in the process. And the law firms and the indictments of folks are just examples of that.
So, Michael, let's talk about what could come next. First of all, for the firms that did cut the deal, who have suffered, I would argue, some real reputational embarrassment here. But also, is a template being established here where in other aspects of society, where the Trump administration, like perhaps higher education, where the Trump university has really tried to crack down, is this creating some sort of blueprint for other places to fight back?
Look, I think that when the executive orders hit first in the spring of last year, Trump looked like he had a lot of momentum. A lot of people were very afraid of him, and that really helped his ability to scare them and get them to do things that they normally wouldn't do. I still think that Trump strikes fear into people, but it's not as great as it was, at least domestically, a year ago. And there is a blueprint for those that are fighting that they can survive. The biggest question about those fighting is is there enough resolve at Harvard? Harvard has fought. They have tried to make a deal time and time again as they have fought over the past year. But in the process of that, they look like they have been sort of toughened to a position where it's like, can we really do a deal with this president? And as Trump's behavior has sort of continued in the direction that it's gone in throughout his presidency, I think it has made it harder for Harvard to do a deal, because the president of Harvard would have to turn around to his board that has someone like Penny Pritzker on it and say, we're going to do a deal with Donald Trump. And doing a deal with Donald Trump comes with a connotation today that to some people, a significant portion of the country, doesn't look good. So in terms of the fighters and the non-fighters, the real question about it now is Harvard, and what is Harvard going to do?
So back to the law firms. Some of these law firms are global law firms, some of the most powerful law firms in the world. So they operate out of New York City. Several of them, at the inception of this, as we're talking about, they folded to the President of the United States. Do you have any sense of the eternal stain on the reputation of that firm? Because if you're a big company looking for representation in a federal court, you're going to look at a law firm that folded. Instinctively, you're going to say, geez, folded against Donald Trump. I got to look for another law firm that'll fight for me. Any sense of the stain, the eternal stain that's left on these firms?
So, look, we need to see, I think the numbers will come out in the next few days or weeks about how much money the firms made, the ones that made deals. And many of the firms that made deals were sort of law firms that had big corporate practices, that were doing big business deals with big business. It doesn't seem, from what the anecdotal evidence that we have, that doing the deals really impacted them in terms of the amount of money they made. We'll know for sure in the coming days, but it doesn't look like it had a huge impact on that. And that's why they did the deals, because to them, they argued it was a business decision. In terms of litigation, if you're a company and you want someone to go out and fight for you, certainly, there's a fair amount of companies that have said, and there's been reporting on this, that we don't want one of the capitulating firms to represent us. We want someone who has some resolve to them. The long-term impact of this on big law, it's really hard to tell. You would think that a lot of these firms that certainly are recruiting from Ivy League law schools, where there's typically, more liberals than conservatives, would have a difficult time attracting talent, because if you're a capitulating firm, most of the people on the left don't want to go work for you. It'll take time to see what that is. But at the end of the day, the name's Paul Weiss, is synonymous with making a deal, being the first ones to make the deal, and a firm that had such a reputation for fighting.